They didn't ask if I wanted to marry her. They told her family I already agreed. Not privately. After Sunday dinner, they said it out loud, in front of everyone. I was 31. She was 58. My uncle smiled over his coffee and said, "Some men don't know when life is finally offering them stability." Sandra didn't. This wasn't a blind date. It was an arrangement, and I was the last person they'd let in on it. My mother had that relieved look she gets when something ugly is moving on schedule. My father wouldn't meet my eyes. My cousins kept drifting in and out with fake errands, the kind people invent when they want a front row seat without admitting they're watching. Then my mother turned to Sandra's family and said, "Daniel understands responsibility. Not to me, to them. Like I was something being transferred." I looked at Sandra again. She reached for her water and missed the glass at first. Not by much, just enough to tell me she wasn't calm. Just enough to tell me I wasn't the only one being held in place by the room. She wasn't avoiding eye contact. She was trying not to break in a room where breaking had consequences. I should have stood up right then. I didn't. I stayed long enough for them to think I still belonged to the plan. By the end of the night, my uncle was mentioning timing. My mother was talking about good families moving quickly. One of Sandra's brothers said it was nice seeing two families bringing things back where they belonged. Nothing about that room felt like marriage. It felt like paperwork with breathing people attached to it. The next morning, my mother called and opened with, "Let's not make this harder than it has to be." Not, "Are you okay?" Not, "Did that blindside you?" That. She gave me the family version. Sandra came from a serious family. There were old ties between the households. Men my age had to think beyond personal preference. That was how she described my right to choose who I married. Over the next 2 weeks, pressure came at me from every direction. My uncle called to talk about duty. My mother called to talk about respect. My father mostly said nothing. At some point, it stopped sounding like advice. It started sounding like instructions I wasn't allowed to refuse. Then came the second meeting, Sandra's family home outside Aiken. Big house, polished wood, too many portraits of dead people staring down like they still expected obedience. They sat us side by side in a sunroom and let people drift through on fake excuses just to study whether the arrangement looked cooperative. Sandra barely spoke, not because she was cold, because that room wasn't built to survive honesty. One of her brothers leaned in the doorway and said, "Nice when things settle themselves, isn't it?" Sandra kept her eyes on her lap and said, "Things don't settle themselves, people settle them." Then my uncle stood with his glass and said, "It's good to see the understanding finally moving where it was always supposed to go." People nodded. Sandra's brother added, "About time." For a second, Sandra looked up like she was about to say something. Then she didn't. That was the first real crack for me. They weren't discussing a possibility. They were celebrating an outcome they thought already belonged to them. On the drive home, my mother called before I reached the highway and asked about dates. Not, "What do you think?" Not, "Did that feel wrong?" Dates. After that, I changed pace. I didn't make speeches. I didn't start a war. I just stopped helping. I returned calls late, delayed answers, showed up when required, then gave them nothing useful. That changed the temperature. My uncle got sharper. My mother got tearful. My cousin got sarcastic. And my father started calling more than he had in years. A week before they wanted my answer, my uncle asked me to lunch. Said he wanted to speak plainly, man to man. After 3 minutes of fake small talk, he leaned in and said, "You've had the freedom to build your own life. Now it's time to be useful to the family that gave you that freedom." Useful? I asked him, useful for what? He smiled and said, "Some things were put in motion before you were young to understand them." 2 nights later, my mother hosted what she called a small dinner at my parents' house. My aunt was there. My cousin was there. 2 of Sandra's relatives were there too, which told me this wasn't dinner. It was enforcement with napkins. Halfway through the meal, my mother laid her hand on mine and said, "Your father and I didn't sacrifice our whole lives for you to embarrass both families now." The room went still. I looked at her hand, then at my father. He didn't stop her. Then my aunt said, "At some point, a man has to stop living like he's still choosing only for himself." I moved my hand out from under my mother's and said, "You're making this sound like a debt." She answered too fast. "Some debts are family." Nobody corrected her. That sentence sat in the room like it made perfect sense. I left before dessert. That was the first time I realized something was off. Not wrong, planned. Like I was the last person being informed about something already decided. At 9:14 the next night, a man named Dr. Marcus Webb called me from a number I didn't recognize. He said he was calling about Sandra. Then he said, "I know I shouldn't be the one doing this, but if I stay quiet any longer, I'm helping them." He told me Sandra had someone in her life. He told me the arrangement was tearing her apart. Then he said the line that snapped everything into focus. "This isn't two families preserving tradition," he said. "This is two families racing a deadline." Deadline. That was the first real word anybody had used with me. That was the first honest sentence anyone had said to me. After we hung up, I called Sandra. She answered on the second ring. I told her Marcus had called. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "I asked him not to, but I'm glad he did." Then I asked the only question that mattered. "Do you want this?" She said, "No." No pause, no performance, just no. I asked her what the deadline was. Her grandfather had created a private trust years earlier. It controlled access to deeds, land records, and original legal papers tied to disputed property both families had been fighting over for years. No copies, no backup plan. And buried in that trust was a condition. Before a fixed date, there had to be one marriage between the two families. One. If it happened, both families kept control. If it didn't, the documents passed to an outside board and neither family could touch them again. They didn't need a wedding, they needed a signature disguised as one. Then Sandra said, "They're not marrying us. They're closing a deal." I asked why she hadn't refused outright. She was quiet for a second, then said, "Because in my family, women who say no in public spend years paying for it in private." I asked if she wanted me to expose all of it. She said, "I want it stopped." So I stopped it. Not with a scheme, not with a threat. I just waited until they needed my yes in front of the people who had already spent weeks acting like they owned it. 4 nights later, my uncle hosted another family dinner. Smaller room, closer walls, lower voices. The kind of setting families choose when they think pressure gets stronger the fewer witnesses there are. I went because staying home would have given them an excuse. Dinner got halfway done before my uncle set down his glass and said it was time to move forward with dignity. Sandra wasn't there. That told me exactly how much dignity they meant. Then my uncle looked at me and said, "We need your answer tonight." I set my fork down. He already knew what my answer was. He just needed me to say yes in front of everyone. My answer is no. Nobody moved. My mother stared at me like I'd cursed at the table. My uncle asked what game I thought I was playing. I said, "The one where I'm apparently supposed to marry somebody so two families can keep their hands on papers that were never mine to protect." That landed hard. My cousin actually whispered, "What papers?" For the first time since this started, the room lost its shape. My mother said, "Who's been talking to you?" I said, "People started telling me the truth when both families got too arrogant to hide what this is." My uncle tried to recover, said I didn't understand the full picture. I said, "Then bring the full trust into the room, all of it. Not the cleaned up version, all of it." He didn't. He couldn't. Because now the silence meant something different. It didn't mean control anymore. It meant exposure. My mother started crying, not softly, with anger. She said, "After everything this family has done for you, you'd throw this away for a woman you barely know?" That was when my father finally spoke, not to defend me, to her. "Enough," he said. But it hit the room like a plate breaking, because he had sat through all of it, and now, when it was already burning down, that was all he had. I looked at him and realized something colder than anger. He had known more than he ever admitted, and less than it would take to stop it. So I gave them the truth they were all trying to hide behind better words. "You didn't ask me to build a life," I said. "You asked me to make myself useful." Nobody answered that. Then I looked at my father and said, "You could have told me." He dropped his eyes. That was answer enough. I stood up. No shouting, no slammed door, no performance for the room. "I'm not doing this to her," I said, "and I'm not doing it for any of you." Then I walked out. 3 weeks later, Sandra called. Her family had met Marcus. The truth was in the open now, which meant they couldn't keep hiding it inside other people's futures. Some people were furious. Some were suddenly using words like misunderstanding, as if that could wash the fingerprints off the whole thing. She thanked me. I told her I hadn't done anything heroic. I just stopped cooperating. She said, "For people raised like us, that usually is heroic." My family still speaks to me. Not the same way. What they tried to hand me that spring wasn't marriage. It wasn't tradition. It wasn't stability. It was a closing document dressed up like destiny. And when they finally reached for my yes to make the whole thing real, they needed my yes to close their deal. They just didn't realize. I was the only thing they never owned.
So yeah, I'm curious. Like, would you have said yes in that room, or walked out like hated? Though it's a fictional story, but yeah, let me know what you think. Um, See you in the next. Thank you.